What's up, amigos? It's the Project Maker Show, episode 91. Guys, I want to talk to you about some problems that I see with developing players in the Northeast. That includes New York, that includes New England, two regions that I know very well and that I coach in. So if you have a player, if you're a parent of a player, or if you're a player in the Northeast, New York, New England, or any states nearby, this show's for you, and we can talk about some of the challenges and pitfalls that I see, and also some ways that you can overcome those challenges to become one of the best players in the United States, and if you'd like to go higher, one of the best players in the world. So I think there's a lot of value on this program. Let's dive in. And one of the main challenges in the Northeast is obviously the weather and that players play indoors. And so that's a big challenge because most of the courts are hard court, and most of the time the players here get rewarded for taking the ball early, hitting the ball flat and hard, and being aggressive. And so one of the main battles that I have all the time with young junior players from this area of the country is I try to teach the kids more the Spanish way, which is patience, tactical development, working on their movement and consistency. And those are things that are a lot easier to teach and learn on slow red clay in Spain, where I studied for over 20 years, and a lot harder to teach on an indoor court in New York or in Boston, Massachusetts, Connecticut, anywhere in the Northeast here, New Jersey. It's just much harder to teach point construction, ball recognition, movement, because the points tend to be pretty short, patience, and general strategy and tactical development. It's a lot more difficult to develop here in the Northeast than in some other regions of the world, and even in the country. For example, down in Florida, the conditions are slower. There's a lot of hard, true clay courts, and tennis is outdoors primarily. And so you get a lot more grinding, and as a consequence, the points are longer. Kids have to work on their movement more in general. And there's more of an emphasis on point construction rather than just point demolition or point destruction, where that's what I see a lot here in the Northeast. I see players who are just trying to destroy the ball rather than to create opportunities, working through a sequence of rallying, building, and then finishing. They're just, trying to attack everything. That's very common here in the Northeast. And I don't see a lot of spin development. So coming from a clay court perspective in Spain, I like to see my junior players playing with some topspin. Not every player can play with extreme topspin like a Rafa Nadal, but I think a good topspin can be quite a weapon, an advantage. You can use topspin to bounce the ball high over your opponent to create a kicking shot that's heavy, that's hard to handle, that opens up opportunities. And you can use topspin to help your consistency. And you can use topspin to create more angles. You can hit angles more consistently. So there's just so many benefits to topspin, and I think that's one of the reasons why at the pro level you see a lot more players with topspin nowadays than you did generations ago. So you have long winters, a lot of indoor tennis here in the Northeast, and a lot of fast hard courts. And what do you get as a result? It takes a very determined coach with a very thoughtful process to make a player fundamentally sound in their movement, fundamentally sound in point construction, to have a small amount of patience, and to work on actually constructing points rather than just destructing the ball. And I can think of about this many coaches if I'm holding up 5 fingers or less that I know most of the leading coaches in the Northeast, and there's just a small handful of coaches actually trying to do that. And in my mind, a lot of the rest have sort of succumbed or fallen for the traps of the Northeast here. Maybe they've just been coaching here in a bubble for so long they don't realize what the other world is what the big world is doing. There's many coaches in the Northeast here that have never been to Europe. They've never haven't traveled very much, and so there's a danger in staying in one region of the country and just developing players. You never grow and see different ways to play and how the rest of the world's doing it. So one of the things I like about Florida, and there are some positives and negatives to going to train in Florida, but one thing that I think is a positive is that you get a lot of immigrant coaches in Florida, especially from places like Spain, South America, and those coaches, Argentina is a great example. Those coaches tend to emphasize what I'm talking about: point construction, movement, patience, building, rather than just trying to smash the ball every time or slap the ball every time. So many juniors that I see, particularly now in New England, I'm coaching a lot more in New England now. I coached 20 years in New York City, and now I'm not far from New York. I'm actually probably 30 miles from the New York border here in Manchester, Vermont. So I'm not far from New York, but technically my club's in New England now. And you just see a lot of New England juniors who are just smashing the ball with really sloppy form, not much footwork, hitting the ball really flat. One of the things you see a lot is the ball will go an inch over the net for like a rally ball. Like that's, in my mind, coming from Spain, a rally ball is supposed to have a couple feet of net clearance. You want to keep the ball away from the net. The net is the big enemy. But apparently that's not the case for a lot of kids here in New York and in New England. New York, I think, is a little better. We have a little bit more immigrant coaches in New York. But the problem that I have with New York and New York City coaches is like a revolving door, man. Very few. You get some good coaches coming into New York City who maybe have traveled in Europe or South America, and they're teaching a more holistic style, a more multidimensional style, more versatility. And then, they kind of move on and end up spending a year or two, get frustrated, or they, for whatever reason, not many elite coaches stay, in my experience, in the Northeast, particularly my experience in New York. I can think of a handful of coaches in New England. Anytime you get a coach who's from South America or from places like Spain, even even Italy now, France, those are powerhouse tennis countries in the world, and they tend to teach more of what I'm talking about. They tend to have more access to clay and outdoor courts. France is a little different depending on whether you're in the north of France or in the south of France. I'm speaking specifically to the south of France, where there's a lot of outdoor tennis, a lot of clay courts, a lot of tournaments on clay. And so naturally the kids develop topspin, they develop point construction, they develop some patience and strategy, and they learn how to move. Movement, that's such an issue here in the Northeast. How many young kids come to me in Manchester, Vermont? You wouldn't think, Vermont, I'm trying to change the whole reputation of Vermont, really in the whole country, that Vermont has historically been a place for low performance in tennis. But now I'm here and I have players visiting to train high performance with me in the mountains of Vermont. And the first thing we're usually working on is how to move better, to move more efficiently, to move with more balance, to move with more fluidity. So some of that's with the actual technique of moving, some of that's with the vision and learning how to read and receive the ball well, and some of that's re-educating the player spatially, kinesthetically, what they feel and the distance that they have with the ball, things like that. I think that's really, really important, as a foundation for the game. But I don't see that that's a priority for every coach in the Northeast. I still think there's many coaches and players who are just trying to hit. I'm holding up air quotes. Just trying to hit the ball hard, hit the ball flat, I mean, you can win matches like that. You can be very good like that. You can get to a very high level, but you're limited. You know, you're limited, and I don't think that's going to take you to, unless you're just a genetic freak, I don't think that's going to take you to the highest levels of the game, particularly a worldwide game where you have to travel around the world and play on many different surfaces and mostly outdoors. You know, not like, you know, most of the juniors here in the Northeast are indoors. Most of tennis is played outdoors, and a lot of tennis is played on slower courts. You have to learn how to play, you know, and develop points and run and move. So a corollary of that is that there's a lack of physical development. So a lot of kids in the Northeast don't spend time on their fitness. That's a big emphasis in Spain, for example. The system that I love so much is to be physically superior, to have physical superiority over your opponent. And I don't really see that as an emphasis in the Northeast. I think a lot of players here are pressed for time. They have very little, they have a very small window after school. Usually schools are tough, you know, academics are tough. So the kids are pressed for time. I've talked about this on a lot of podcasts. And so they got to get their couple hours of tennis in, and usually the fitness takes a back seat if it's being done at all, and including injury prevention. So I just think there's a high likelihood, if you're a junior in New England or a junior in New York, that you're playing, you know, maybe 10 hours a week of tennis. If you're a decent junior, maybe you're playing more if you're a top national ranked junior, but you're not spending enough time on injury prevention. You're not spending enough time on moving with speed and agility, and you're not spending enough time developing your endurance, or maybe just not even getting enough court time to develop your endurance. You know, that can be an issue too. So the kids who are sort of breaking out of that mold are the kids who are homeschooling or online schooling. Then that frees up more time during the day to prioritize fitness. And that's one of the main reasons, it's a big part of why online schooling is so popular now at the top national level. You see so many players now in schools like ICL and things like that, because it frees up more time to develop the complete athlete. And that's what you really need to compete at the highest level of tennis. So in general, a lot of the kids that I see are overscheduled, they have too much homework, long school days, a lot, you know, they're very, very busy. And that's going to take away from, obviously, the tennis, because some kids just don't even get enough tennis time. They're wondering why their rankings mediocre in the section. A lot of times they're just simply not playing enough tennis. They're not getting enough high quality tennis. It's something we could also touch on. But as a corollary of that, they don't have time for fitness, and their fitness level is lower, because a lot of your fitness can come from just, you know, hitting a lot of balls per day. You can get pretty fit playing a lot of tennis. You may develop some imbalances that could lead to injury, but aside from a very specific fitness program, just playing a lot of tennis will help you get into shape. And sometimes that's even a struggle for kids in the Northeast, not to mention the cost of playing tennis is very high here because of the because of the weather and playing indoors. So there's just a lot of challenges like that you have to overcome. You have to get your 10 to 15 hours a week of training in. You can't hope to be a top junior if you're training just a couple days a week. You've got to get that in. I've talked about this on many shows. And you've got to find time for, at the minimum, injury prevention. A good injury prevention program. You should have a musculoskeletal screening. You should understand how you're going to try to strengthen your body, especially areas that are susceptible to injury. You're going to have to understand how to mobilize your body, gain flexibility, and prepare your body for the rigors of high-level junior tennis. You have to find time for that, and you also need the court time. So there's just no way out, especially for kids whose families are dead set against online schooling or homeschooling. That becomes probably the biggest challenge. So if you're in one of those families and you like this podcast, you like this show, you have to find a solution there. You have to find at least some time for injury prevention, strengthening, a little time for speed and agility, and some time for endurance training. And then you have to get your hours on the tennis court. You've got to find a way to do that, or you just simply cannot achieve what you want to achieve. So that's what I would say about that. You know, some people say that the kids are soft or entitled, or that the parents are spoil them, but I don't think that's really an issue in the Northeast as compared to other parts of the country. That hasn't been my impression. And I've worked with many wealthy kids who have a lot of resources, who are super, super tough and not spoiled and very hard workers. And there's kind of a myth in tennis that you can't be a top player if you're wealthy, you come from a good background, if you have privilege. And there's some truth to that, but I think that is becoming more and more of a myth, because you see, in my personal experience, I've had many privileged students who are incredibly hard workers, some of the hardest workers I've ever seen. And I have had kids also that had too much on a silver platter. So it does cut both ways, but certainly being from a privileged background doesn't prevent you from becoming a serious top player and a great competitor. And I think even now on the Pro Tour, we've seen some great examples of that. For example with players like Emma Navarro. Navarro comes to mind, and Pegula comes to mind, another one. I have two top American players who come from very privileged backgrounds who are competing with the best players in the world. And I think that's a great example that it doesn't matter if you're rich, you can still be tough as nails. And that a lot of times that comes down to the parenting, the way the parents raise the kids and the values that the parents teach, whether they're privileged or not. So it is true that if you have come from less privilege, usually you just tend to be more hungry, you know, but also it makes it really hard to get those resources to pay for the court time, to pay for the tennis that you need, to get the physical training, you know, to get the athletic training. All those things cost money. It's an expensive endeavor to develop a top junior player in the Northeast. So there are some factors there that are at work. It does help to have resources, and I think it's reasonable if you have an elite, if you're trying to develop an elite player in the Northeast, it's reasonable to start thinking like six figures to get the best of the best coaching and training for your kid. It can easily, plus the tournament travel, it can easily cost that much. If that's way out of your budget, you're going to have to really scramble and cut deals and try to get your kid to the best possible ranking you can, and then get some help, you know, get some scholarship help, which is out there. I help a lot of kids whenever I can. You know, I got to pay the bills, but I always try to help, you know, kids that I like, good families, kids that I respect and that I think have a lot of potential. I try to work with the families to help them whenever I can. Because private lessons are expensive. Tennis is very expensive. It's an expensive sport. And I understand that. I think in the Northeast, for some reason, especially in New England, there's a lot of recreational clubs, a lot of recreational environments. If you're a kid, or if you are a kid watching this, and you're in an environment that's not really a high performance demanding environment, that's a real problem. You know, I've done many podcasts on this channel and on this show, and you guys should search them up about, you know, how to develop your UTR, how to develop a junior champion. What are the problems that I often see? And one major problem is being in a low performance, sometimes I joke, country club environment. There just seems to be a lot of environments like that here in New England. I'm coming from a New York perspective. There is also that element in New York, but there are, I think, a bit more pockets of high performance training in the eastern region, you know, more serious academy programs, more so than in New England. And for some reason, there's a lot of kids in New England who are not getting good technical development. I see them a lot on the junior circuit, especially in the younger ages. And as we mentioned, not getting good tactical development, just learn how to slap the ball, you know, flat slaps with bad technique. You see a lot of horrific service actions in New England. You see that in New York too. But like in the 10s and 12s, you could see a tournament with 32 players and see all sorts of horrific serve technique, you know, really problematic, inefficient serve techniques at the young ages. And that, you know, another thing I noticed in New England is there are some kids who you can get a pretty good ranking in New England. You could probably break into the top 20 or 30 in the section. So that means you're getting pretty close to making nationals, maybe making zonals with very, very ragged games, very rough around the edges game, not smooth, world-class technique, not much movement, bad serve, like I said, like pretty rough serve technique. And you can kind of exist in New England at a pretty high level. And I think that's a testament probably to the lack of depth in New England. So you have at the top of New England, just sort of comparing my background from New York tennis to New England, the top players are similar, but as you start going down the rankings, there's less depth. The level starts to drop off more in New England. I don't know if it's probably because participation rates are a little lower in New England than New York. There's just more people, in the New York City area. And I think a player who's like 30 in New England is not really on par with a player who's 30 in New York. I think there's a differential there. Maybe a subtle differential, but a clear differential in level there. And just in terms of technical development, it seems that it's possible to exist in New England, play enough tournaments, collect enough points, and get a pretty good ranking from a combination of those factors. Just like kind of a lower participation rate, so there's just not as many players in the junior rankings. And then the level, a lot of kids coming out of like sort of recreational environments, the actual level of tennis is not that high for the ranking. At the highest level of the section, there's some amazing players. When you start going up into the top 5 in New England, you see some really good, depends on the age division, but you see players who, some of them are dominating the national level. I've coached some of them myself. And you see the same in New York, but like you go down to 10 or 15, ranking 20 in New York, and the players are, still pretty well molded players, as I think as compared to New England in general. It's just a generalization, but so in New England, I think you have to be really careful. You have to make sure you're getting enough of the high quality training. Try to identify, if you're a parent or a kid, just try to identify if the place, the environment that you're in, is it a high performance environment? And there's some tip-offs to that. Like, are the coaches demanding? Are the coaches pushing you? Do you feel pressure? Or is it like a very chill, laid back environment? Are there other high ranked or at least like very serious players who want to become high ranked around you? Or are they separate from you? Are you doing a lot of groups? I think groups are a very big red flag, especially in New England, also in New York. Are you doing a lot of groups, a lot of quote unquote clinics? I think that's really a major red flag. If you're doing a lot of clinics, if you're kind of doing like the 2 clinics a week and a private lesson, or maybe even you're training 4 clinics a week, and you think that's sufficient to get to a high level. For most kids, it's not. And it takes a very, very special group and a very special coach to make groups work in a very productive way that gets your player to the top. It is possible in a very small group with a very special coach and the right dynamic of players, but that's often not there. And so my experience is that kids in clinics underperform. I was just talking to a family about this, actually a family from mid-Atlantic section, which is also not it's kind of like New England, not the strongest section in terms of level and depth. Like if you compare to their neighbor Southern, like Southern's a very much stronger participation rate, and the level of tennis in Southern is much stronger. Reminds me of New York, that comparison between the two regions, the two USDA sections. So I was talking to the dad about this very thing. He had been putting his kids in these groups, thinking that was going to be the solution. And I said, no, I actually think that's not the solution. I would try. It's very hard to find a really good group that checks all the boxes. You're much better off getting one-on-one private hitting with the college player, high UTR player. You're much better off giving the boys or the girls individual work, and not doing many groups, maybe supplementing with the group here or there, but that shouldn't be the foundation of your training. So like if you're a parent or a player, and if the bulk of your training is groups or clinics, I think you're probably not achieving your best tennis. You're not going to play your best tennis out of that. A lot of kids in the Northeast, major problem is not playing matches. So again, like let's say you're in like that clinic setup, you're doing 2 to 4 clinics a week, you may not be playing any sets during the week. You may not be serving a lot. If the clinics are focusing on other things like ground strokes and drills, you may only be serving a small amount. And so that when you get to a Friday or Saturday tournament, you actually haven't played any sets before the weekend tournament. That's a big mistake, you know. So when I'm training kids from New England or New York, I try to find solutions to all these challenges so that my players can get better faster. And other kids who are sort of stuck, maybe they're stuck in a low performance environment, maybe they've fallen into some of these traps. You know, this is a competition. My job is to try to advise the kids working with me and the families that I have. They hire me to give their kids an edge, you know, to try to find ways to improve faster, essentially to improve faster. So I feel like I have all these hacks that I share with my families that will help in these situations. And then I'm sharing some of them with you here, just to help all of the viewers and listeners of the program. You know, match play, like it's a setup. If your kid, or if you're a player, if your kid does clinics and then doesn't serve that much and doesn't play any sets and then goes into an important tournament on Friday night or Saturday, they're not going to be well prepared, even though they've hit a lot of balls. So that's you know, something that's very important, near and dear to my heart. Get the training right. Try to restructure training so that kids have a better chance of succeeding, getting better results on the weekend tournaments. You know, try to find coaches. This is something I recently did a very popular podcast where I talked about the 3 essentials to becoming a top junior player. A lot of parents like that podcast. I encourage you to check it out. It's a month or 2 back. And I talked about the 3 ingredients, you know, that all players need to have. And that is one of those ingredients. Well, one of them is the tournaments. You have to have good tournaments. And we just did a show about how there's so much cheating in tournaments. It makes the tournaments very, you know, unhealthy for the kids, but you're going to have to do it. There's no other solution. You need competition. You need training, which we just talked about. You need the, you know, quick review. You need the training, and the training shouldn't be just, you know, average clinics. You need to give your kid, or you need to get the best possible training, you know, that money can buy, that you can find, that you can barter for, that you can hustle for. You got to get that. And then the other part is getting some elite coaching. Coaching is not just information, it's also mentoring. It is information, it's guidance. You know, when you have a good coach, a really high-level coach in your corner, that coach can help you avoid mistakes. I think that's a big part of that thing that I do with parents when I work with families. I sit down with the parents, I try to help them avoid the pitfalls and mistakes so that they don't make critical mistakes with their kid. Who wants that? You know, who wants to waste time or lose time? Or who wants to spend a year or 2 with a development plan that is suboptimal in terms of the way it's going to develop the kid? That can happen. You can be in an environment that's suboptimal, not even know it. So I see that all the time. So the coach, it matters on so many levels. A coach who's willing to work with the family, who's willing to open up a dialogue and communicate with mom and dad, and really sort of become that triangle, coach, parent, kid, you know, be an integral part of that triangle, coach, parent, kid. That is hard to find. You know, a lot of coaches, you can't even get them on the phone. You message them, they don't get back to you. You email them, sometimes they're very erratic. You know, a lot of coaches are not good with the communication with the parents. A lot of coaches don't even like parents. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been to many coaching conferences that coaches do not even like parents. So I think when you have a coach on your team who's actually like really part of the team, that creates so much efficiency. It really, really helps to avoid traps. And you can get all sorts of hacks implemented that save your kid time. And so your kid goes up a little bit faster than the kid and the family that's falling into traps. So that's what a great coach does for your team, you know. And of course, the great coach helps on the court, you know, teaching the player how to construct points, all the things we were talking about, how to move better, you know, building a good solid game, building world-class technique, whatever it is. That information is super important too, you know, just avoiding like some type of technical flaw that could hurt your child's performance, some type of technical flaw that might cause an injury. Basically putting together a really good blueprint for the player. That's also the coach's job, and the way that a coach helps the team. And then the other part I would say is motivating. Like sometimes parents don't realize that the coach it's not just what information is coming out, it's the relationship is super critical. Like the psychologically, emotionally, just having a positive, energized coach in your kid's corner can make a huge difference in results. Sometimes that could be as simply the kid is willing to fight more because his coach believes in him or her. Sometimes just that it's a hard road. Junior tennis is such a long, tough road. Having a positive mentor to help lift the player up and to motivate them when they're down, and to get them through rough patches can really make the difference in terms of successful junior development. So I wouldn't discount that. You know, sometimes your kid learned the forehand and the forehand looks good, and the parents say, all right, we don't need that coach anymore. The forehand looks good. That's happened to me before. Like I built many players with world-class technique, and you know, sometimes the families, they decide we're going to move on, and then I see the players, their results go a little bit lower. But I don't think that's because their technique got worse. I think that the families sometimes don't realize that there's an emotional bond between the coach and the player that's very fundamental, and that can help propel a player upwards. It's very important to have that relationship. So if that relationship is not replaced with something just the same, a player can start to underperform, even if nothing's changed like in their technique or anything like that. So those are the reasons those are things you can do. Like if you're a parent or if you're a player in New York and New England, try to get those three elements in place. I'm a big believer in that. Those three, sometimes they call it a triad or a triangle or a trinity. You know, good coaching, high-level coaching, high-level training, and then really good competition. Those are the three buckets that you have to fill, and those are the areas that you really need to hyper-focus on to get the best results, so no matter where you are. And I would say that if you are in the Northeast here, you don't need to move to Florida. It's not true. You know, you can develop and become a top player out of the Northeast here. You just have to watch out for the pitfalls that I mentioned. It helps to understand what's happening in the big world, to travel, you know, play in Europe, go to South America, see the way other players are developing in the world, and learn from that. Try not to get inframed in the New England or New York bubble here, and just, you know, you go to a lot of local tournaments, everybody's hitting the ball flat, the points are all short. A lot of the world doesn't play like that. So you don't become inframed by your limited perspective. Try to travel, try to learn. Technology is amazing for that. You can watch videos of training and coaches coaching all over the world now, just through YouTube, through this medium. It's incredible. So try to learn, no excuses. You can definitely develop a top game here in the Northeast. Find a great coach to help your kid. Find that positive mentor, both for the kid and to guide you as a parent. Unless you have all the experience, if you're limited in your own experience, get advice, avoid mistakes. That builds efficiencies. That creates results that are a little bit faster than results of the other kids who are not getting that. Make sure you're getting high quality training each week. Watch out for the clinics. And make sure the competition is good. A lot of kids, one thing that I've noticed from New England, a lot of kids are like playing L6s for a long time, which I think is crazy. Like, my job is to get my players through L6 as fast as possible. I want them to play as few L6 as possible. And what we've learned is, I didn't notice this as much in New York, but for some reason, a lot of kids playing L6s to collect points and kind of staying there, like for a long time. A lot of kids playing in green ball for a long time, which I think is a huge mistake. You should get out of green ball also as quickly as you can and start playing more competitive tennis. So that's another thing that I would advise, is try to find the best possible competition. That may mean leaving New England or leaving New York to try to get to other parts of the country, or even traveling some internationally to get some different variety of opponents, some exposure to new environments. I think that's very healthy for kids who are growing up in the Northeast here. So those are some things that I think you can do. Don't cut out fitness, and also make sure that you're getting your kid, or if you're a kid, you got to play almost every day. If you want to be great, you got to get court time. I know it's hard, it's expensive. I mean, if you have to go shovel outdoor courts and play with gloves on, you have to do that. There's no way you can get really good at this game if you're playing, 3 days a week and it's sporadic, and the other days you're doing some fitness. Like, that's not going to work. Like, you have to play really 5-6 days a week, couple hours a day at a minimum. And a lot of kids are doing more than that. And then you need the time for your fitness. So if you want to be really good, you have to accept that this is a game that you have to put in a lot of work, a lot of commitment. That's a daily commitment to get on the tennis court. And you have to find a way to do that. If you have to cut deals with your local club, if you have to, barter, if you have to, I don't know who you got to negotiate with. You have to set up your winter time, indoor court time, or you're not gonna make it as a junior player in the Northeast. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed this talk about challenges in the Northeast. As you may know, I am a coach in the Northeast. I am always looking for young champions. I'm looking to work with families more and more. I'm getting older, and I look back on my years in high performance coaching, and I ask myself, why am I in this game? Why am I doing this? Well, I love kids, and I love tennis, but I like working with good kids, hardworking kids, coachable kids, and I like the positive memories that I have are the good people, the good families that I've developed long-term relationships with. That to me holds a lot of value. That's why I haven't moved on from coaching. I still love to coach, but particularly working with, good families with solid values, who have hardworking kids and that just have a big dream. I really enjoy projects like that. So if you're one of those families, please, you can email me, call me. 914-462-2912 is my cell phone and WhatsApp. You can email me, chris@chrislewit.com. There's lots of ways to get a hold of me, and I'd like to learn about your family and your player. As you may know, we have a small group of players living here with me, training full-time in the bubble here in the mountains. We have this safe bubble in the Northeast, but your kid will learn to play the Spanish way in the Northeast bubble. I call it a training bubble. I call it the incubator. You can be like in an incubator, safe from all undue influences out there, and you would just work hard with no distractions here in the mountains. Or you can come visit. You can come to train with me in the summer. We have an awesome summer camp coming up. I'm really proud of it. Very good, high performance camp, very serious camp based on Spanish training principles. And I'd love to have you guys come train anytime. We're actually training every weekend now, and I work almost every day. I coach almost every day. I'm a hard worker. I got to pay for my daughter's Columbia University tuition payment. So I'm working hard here. And if you want to come visit anytime, holidays or weekends, I would love to see you on my court. All right, guys, I'll see you on the next program. God bless.